Then it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marco Barker, has served as the inaugural Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Inclusion since April of 2019. He previously served in diversity leadership positions at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, at Louisiana State University, and Westminster College. Dr. Barker leads the Office of Diversity and Inclusion here at UNL, which shapes the policies and practices needed to advance diversity, equity, and inclusion across the entire university. He works and he and his staff work toward fostering an inclusive and welcoming university campus by collaborating both with campus partners and with the local community. Dr. Barker earned his bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from the University of Arkansas, his master's degree of business administration from Webster University, and a doctoral degree in educational leadership from the Louisiana State University. We are very pleased to have you with us today, Dr. Barker. Thank you so much. I'll turn this over to you now.
Thank you very much, Pat, for the invitation, and certainly to the association for the invitation. I love how the meeting started. So you started with reflection, which is always great. And then certainly talking about supporting students, and also what's really important to me, giving money, which is all really great and really important endeavors. And so again, thank you for having me. I was asked to speak today about the sort of status of diversity at UNL, and then how did I see this association being really engaged in this work. And so that's a really big question that I'll try and answer. So I will move through my presentation relatively quickly. And then if there are questions, I often find that people have questions as things sort of arise. And so you can place those questions in the chat, and our executive specialist, Jerry Harner, is online as well. And so she will be monitoring that. And so if there are questions, so again, if a question sort of comes to you, do not hesitate to go ahead and put it in the chat so that we don't forget it. And then we'll try and get through those questions throughout. So again, Marco Barker, Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Inclusion. And we've been really busy, not only as an office, but also as a campus, as an institution. And so I'm hoping that what you will see will make you proud as emeriti professors and retirees of the university. But also I hope that it ignites you to think about how you can be engaged, and certainly be engaged in diversity and inclusion in your own way. So I've titled this sort of as we see about like what's the path ahead for UNL as it pertains to inclusive excellence. And to start the conversation, I have organized it into sort of these categories. So I want to talk a little bit about the land in which we're gathered, talk really briefly about definitions, and then move into sort of the why behind we do this work, again, what's happening here, and then ways that the association can be engaged. So I like to start in thinking about, as a land-grant institution, that's a huge responsibility. And I suspect some of you, and especially if those professors and staff members who were part of IENR, land is really important. We also take pride in terms of UNL being a land-grant institution, but that also comes with an accountability to recognize where we are, and the importance of that, the fact that we are a public land-grant institution, and we have campuses and extension offices across the state, and to recognize that those offices do reside on past, present, and future homelands of a number of First Nation and tribes. I'll name them here just for those who may not necessarily be able to see the screen, but it's the Pawnee, Ponca, Ottomie, Omaha, Dakota, Lakota, Arapaho, Cheyenne, the Kaw peoples, as well as the relocated Ho-Chunk, as we now know as Winnebago, the Iowa and Sac and Fox peoples. And so UNO has such a tremendous impact on this state, on this region, certainly the nation. And so our ability to be able to have this impact absolutely is a result that we occupied lands that are historic and that are the original lands of the first peoples, indigenous people. And so all of our ability to be able to gather here is a result, unfortunately, of their displacement, violence, settlement, in some cases, resettlement and survival. And so we certainly want to be able to honor and recognize those lands, and also to pay respect to other Native and Indigenous peoples and tribes and First Nations is also really important for us. So at the university, we are using a term called inclusive excellence. And if I had more time, we could probably spend a whole 30 minutes just talking about the definition. But what I will sort of highlight, and what I think is important for you to know, is that we think about inclusion in a very broad way. So diversity can be, again, a number of things. We really sort of clearly define it as differences as we talk about diversity, and there's some different ways that people are different around individual differences and group and social differences that we often refer to. What I love about this definition, and certainly take a look, and I'm really curious, if some of you who are seeing this, if you can put in the chat if there's a particular term that stands out for you. I'm really curious if there's a particular term or word that stands out or resonates with you as part of this definition. Please feel free to put that into the chat. As we think about inclusion and what this works means, we absolutely are trying to be thoughtful and mindful that we know that there are a number of aspects that go into being able to think about the different ways in which people are diverse. And so we know that's discipline. So again, there are people from a number of communities, intellectual communities, again, social communities, social groups, social identities, cultural identities. Geography also plays a part. We know that people have had a number of different upbringings. And so there are so many different ways in which we show up and ways that we connect. And we can see that, again, whether it's in curriculum or the co-curricular, so out of the classroom experiences. But people are always connecting in these ways. These connections, we hope, lead to people having greater awareness about differences, increasing their knowledge about differences. This term here, cognitive sophistication, is really a way of thinking about approaching diversity and inclusion from more critical inquiry. So comparing and contrasting, being able to contextualize what's happening. We also hope that people form greater empathy. I think there are times that we want to have empathy for others and we want to show empathy. And I often pose the question that might we have deeper empathy when we better understand someone, right? And so we build our content knowledge and build our awareness about differences and about other people, what they're experiencing. Might that deepen our empathy? For some of you put in here unintentional, active, intentional, the cognitive sophistication, being intentional, ongoing. Yeah. So the key to this, right? So the latter part of this definition talks about that once we sort of go through this process, that inclusion should be helping us understand the complex ways that people interact with systems, institutions, organizations. But to get to that place, right, to get to a place that we are more critical, we're more thoughtful, and we're more reflective, we have to always be doing this work. So it is ongoing. We have to actively seek it out. I wish that diversity and inclusion could happen by osmosis, but it doesn't. And so we have to be very intentional around this work so that we can understand the complexity. I've been doing this work for over 15 years, and diversity and inclusion is as complex, if not more complex, in terms of really understanding it and thinking about its implications, way more complex than it was even 15 years ago. And so even someone who I consider myself relatively steeped in some concepts and ideas around this, that I still have to do my own active engagement. And so absolutely really important. So if we think about then what might inclusive excellence be, that's our definition of inclusion. The other part of this is equity. We won't get into equity today, but ultimately, ultimately at UNL, what we are striving for when we talk about inclusive excellence is this idea about a well-being of a democratic culture. So this environment where every single person feels like they can contribute and participate equally. I love UNL, and there's such great pride around UNL, but that's not the case for everyone. Not everyone who works or lives, where our students or study at UNL feel like they can fully participate. And so we have work to do around that. And there are a number of factors why people may feel that way. And so we have to work towards thinking about diversity, thinking about inclusion. So being active and intentional, and think about where there may be inequity. So there may not be the same participation or outcomes because of other structures. And so we have to really work on those if we truly want a well-being, a well-functioning democratic culture where everyone feels like they can participate. And that's in everything. That's from learning and teaching and student development and operations and all the ways that we interact. And so know when you hear that word, we can't be excellent unless we're being inclusive. Like those two things go hand in hand. And so I'll talk a little bit about what that looks like. Why it matters, I won't read through all of these. You can absolutely see these here. There are a number of reasons that we have been really focused and making this a priority. Many people go to the educational benefits. Absolutely, they are. But there's also some other really key critical pieces to why we do this work. That we want supportive environments. Like we want people to stay. Like we want people to stay at UNL. From both an employee standpoint, and that they don't leave because they didn't feel welcome or they didn't feel supported or that they had really negative experiences. And the research, so all of these points are guided by research. So research points to that diversity and inclusion absolutely helps to create supportive environments. It also fosters a sense of belonging among people. And then lastly, it absolutely is critical to being able to build strong teams, right? If you think back to where you might have had some of your most creative work or your best ideas, it comes from having a lot of people who have a lot of different perspectives, and so we know that there is a connection between that. So from education to having really positive outcomes, diversity, inclusion, and again, more specifically, inclusive excellence is really critical to our university. So I'm going to throw some data at you in terms of like what's happening at UNL to give you a bit of a snapshot. I do host a State of Diversity for the university where I outline a number of data sets and data points that we have. I've pulled some of those again for all of you here, just to give you a sense of the type of data that helps to inform us. And I'll share a little bit about what this data means and absolutely how we think about it and how we've been responding to it. So here you have the fall 2021 enrollment trends, and this comes from the fall facts, so you can locate this online. There's now a online dashboard that's been created, and this is both for undergraduate and graduate students. So again, I've not parsed them out for the sake of time today, but it gives you a general sense. There are some cases that the trend is fairly consistent around undergraduate and graduate, with some exceptions. Certainly with graduate students, we're gonna see some different percentages around international student populations. But overall, you can see the 10-year trend. As you may or may not know, we've been trending downward in terms of enrollment, and there's a number of factors. And so here you can see that over the last 10 years, we've had a decline in our international student enrollment. Part of that we know are due to federal policies that were enacted years ago, and then most recently with the pandemic, and COVID has also played an impact in terms of travel and what that looks like and restrictions. And so we're seeing some decline as it pertains to international students. We've also had a downward trend and really low enrollment of our Native American and Indigenous students as well. Again, that's both for undergraduate and graduate students. Our Black student enrollment has been relatively stagnant. We've not had much growth at all. And in the case of, in some years, we've actually had a decline in terms of Black student enrollment. Overall, I would say, so if we look at the last 5 years, I will tell you that our students of color, our total students of color population has increased from 2017 to now. And so part of that increase has really been to the increase of our Hispanic or Latinx student population, as well as our Asian American student population, been a part of that. And we've also seen an increase in those who identify as two or more races, or multiracial, biracial, or multi-ethnicities. And so we've seen some increases around that. What that tells us, right, is that there are some instances that we are connecting and being able to have those touch points, where in other areas we have some work to do. And again, particularly with our Native American and Indigenous students and our Black student populations, we have not had the growth that we would like. How we relate to the Big Ten, we are last in the Big Ten as pertains to student of color enrollment. And so again, and recognizing, right, so part of our, I would say part of our challenge, right, is not an excuse, because we absolutely need to be thinking about our representation, that we also think about where we're located in terms of demography in general, right? So we look at the top of this, places like Maryland, College Park, and Berner-Champaign. You could certainly speak to the close proximity to Chicago, and then New Jersey, in terms of Rutgers University, are in locations that are heavily populated with students of color. And so, so we are in the heartland, which again comes with its own challenges. And that's partly, I would say partly why us and Iowa are towards the bottom of this. But again, it's absolutely no excuse for us just to be more creative and thoughtful about how we increase our diversity of students. If we transition to staff, again, in terms of staff roles, this identifies, again, I've pulled out our staff of color that you can see here, that there has been an overall increase in terms of managerial and professional staff of color. We have sort of plateaued in terms of administrators. We are right back where we started and have not had the increase like in the other areas. And certainly we've seen an increase in terms of office and service personnel. And just as a FYI, administrators would be academic administrators, or those who are considered highly ranked administrators. Managerial and professional staff are individuals that are exempt. And then office and service tends to represent roles where individuals are non-exempt in terms of being able to earn overtime. And so that's sort of the distinction between those. If we look at our makeup of women in terms of staff, again, you can see an overall increase there has been in terms of managerial professional. However, in the other categories, they've remained fairly flat. So again, we have some opportunity to be thoughtful and be mindful about how do we increase these numbers, make sure that we are attracting people. Then as it pertains to staff of color in particular, in terms of the Big Ten, we do a bit better in terms of this category. And so we, again, absolutely want to still be thoughtful about this. And I'll share a bit about what these numbers mean for us and what they don't mean, because there's some different perceptions about what these numbers may represent. If we look at faculty composition, and here, and I'll tell you why I pulled out faculty of color and white faculty for sort of two main purposes. One is to show that we, in terms of representation, there is a clear difference in terms of representation. That gap has been made closer. Part of that is that we've done a great job at increasing the number of Latinx or Hispanic faculty members among our ranks. In the other areas, the numbers are really, really low, and we have to do more work as it pertains to that. But I show this as one that often people see this and go, oh my goodness, are you saying that we need to automatically hire people of color? Or is there, are we need to set a quota, or do we not need white faculty? That's absolutely not what this means. We absolutely need all faculty who are committed to inclusive excellence across race and gender. What these data points for me often suggest is that we want to be thoughtful about what's our recruitment and selection processes to ensure that we are not engaging in practices that either we are intentionally or unintentionally missing or discounting people of color in our practices, and that we are doing all that we can to be proactive at encouraging all people to see UNL as a place of choice. Like, this is what this number shows to me. And so again, we absolutely have work to do. If we look at particularly where faculty of color are in terms of rank, in particular, you can see here that the majority are at the assistant level, fewer at the full professor level. We find that most of our faculty of color end up at the associate level. So we've been having conversations about what's happening that faculty of color are not getting to full. There are a number of research points that sort of talk about a number of reasons that could be. And so we're certainly thinking about that and how we ensure that there are not institutional barriers that could be contributing to that. And that's something that our office is right now talking through and really focused on. If we look at women faculty in rank, again, fewer full professors compared to assistant associate. And again, part of that is because we know the trajectory, right, of faculty, that there tends to be, in particular with retirees, there tends to be an influx of assistants that come in. And so it's not alarming, I would say, that we don't see there being more assistants. What we want to see is that all these lines should be increasing over time. I will share really quickly as well that there is this really interesting calculation that helps us. It's called the faculty turnover ratio, and it was developed by Dr. Darrell Smith. She's a researcher out of Claremont Graduate University in California. And she developed this formula to help us think about when we look at hiring, right? And sometimes we can look at hiring and go, oh my goodness, we've done a great job at hiring so many more women faculty, so many more faculty of color, so many more Native American Indigenous faculty. But we also have to really think about what's been the impact of those hires. And so how effective have those hires been to diversify our organizations, but for us, our university. So this ratio, if we compute, so again, this was over a 10-year, over the 6-year period. So looking at 2020 compared to 2014, so how far we went back. If we look at the number of hires between that time, so where did we start? Where did we end up? How many did we hire? How effective were we at hiring? So this 44.6 essentially says that we were 44% effective at those new hires contributing to our diversity. Or in other words, about 55% of those new hires actually replaced people who left. And maybe that leaving was it could be retirement. Or again, it could have been for other reasons. So that's sort of, that's one of the limitations of this calculation. But it does show that we have to be really careful about not resting on, we're doing great at hiring, if we're not thinking about retention. How do we keep people as well? We look at women faculty, a bit more effective, right? So 75% effective. And so 25% of the new hires of women faculty that we made actually essentially replaced faculty who had left. So again, numbers are not always what they seem. And then we look at Big Ten, we're at the bottom of the Big Ten in this case. And so again, I often share with people, we have nowhere to go but up. And so we definitely want to be able to do that. So in terms of diversity inclusion, what's happening, there's a lot happening. And I would say that it's been more fast and furious in the last 5 years, so even prior to my arrival, when I arrived here in 2019. And we're continuing this work. And so You see here, the system office has a number of priorities. If you've not had a chance, I hope you get a chance to meet Stancy Whitcomb Jenkins. She's the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer for the systems office. And so she is the person that often coordinates our system-wide diversity efforts, and we work closely with her as she works closely with us. And so she has a number of policies that are around inclusive excellence. And again, they're listed here in sort of these 5 main areas. And so our work is often guided by those areas. At UNL, we have both the N 2025, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with, and most recently our work around racial equity and anti-racism. So again, and so building in, so how do we take the inclusive excellence framework from the system office, weave that into the N 2025? At the same time, we are also working with units in developing their own particular diversity strategies. So both the academic colleges and administrative areas are doing this. And as a part of that, our office has been trying to piece all of these things together and really create a framework that would allow people to be able to develop these strategies. And then the last thing I would say that, or the last piece that really influences us, is what's happening nationally and what's happening in our state, right? And these sort of external forces absolutely plays an impact and has implications about how we do this work. And so that's always ongoing for us. And then also, what are some of the promising practices in the field that also informs us as well. So just know there are a number of levers that are moving and happening that is not just as simple as, oh, we just want to do this, that we are often being shaped and influenced by a number of different factors. So I was asked to share a little bit about our office. What I will say quickly is that our work is organized into what we consider 6 main areas that we focus, which is really essentially everything. So we are responsible for thinking about faculty diversity, and that's not just us. I mean, we work with a number of entities from Faculty Senate, the deans and academic colleges, the executive vice chancellor's office. So again, there are a number of other people who are engaged in this work, but faculty diversity is one of our areas of interest that we focus. Leadership and learning, so professional development. How do we help people think about inclusive leadership and what that looks like? Inclusive student excellence is a part of that. So again, our student experiences from both how might marginalized and minoritized students experience UNL, but then how do all students increase their own understanding and knowledge around diversity and inclusion? Capacity building, I would say, so this next one has been one of the most critical pieces that we've been really giving attention to it. For me, in my first 2 years here. And this is really about how do we help position groups and committees and task forces to be able to have a greater impact at the institution and to be able to do this work on their own and not necessarily rely on us. Like, we are here to be a resource, but we want people to feel equipped and have the tools and resources they need to be able to do this work where they are. And so this idea about capacity building, building committees, forming committees, supporting committees has been really essential to this work being effective. The other area is external and community engagement. So I meet with community leaders, those who are part of affinity groups. We are now having conversations about doing more with the Alumni Association, and so that would fit into this particular category. And then lastly is our strategic initiatives and partnerships. And so that's thinking about both internally and externally, how do we work with other entities, again, to advance inclusive excellence at the institution. And so we're always thoughtful about that. This is also the area that we, again, are supporting the colleges and administrative units in terms of their strategic plans. So providing them with, again, resources and tools to be able to develop those particular strategies. We have a website, and so this diversity and inclusion website is for the entire university. And then we also have information about our offices in particular. I won't go through all of these numbers, but there are some key takeaways, I would say, if you visit our website, if you look at number one, our hashtag include, that's our learning community, and I'll share a bit more about that towards the end of this conversation, that people can join and be a part of a larger conversation. People can request education from us. We have a number of programs and initiatives. To stay in communication with us or to know what's happening, we invite people to join or sign up for our newsletter, and I'll ask Jerry to put that in the chat as well. You can sign up for that. And then again, you can learn more about our office on that last column about who's a part of our team and sort of how we're structured. In 2025, so I will not spend a lot of time because I suspect this group is already very familiar with in 2025. What I will say is that one of those aims is focused on inclusive excellence and diversity. And so I want to share a bit about what we have done within this particular aim. I would note that the critical piece to doing this work has really been, and as the second bullet point talks about, has been to integrate diversity and inclusion into the work of the institution, right? That diversity and inclusion is not an add-on. It is something that we do and something that's interwoven. So I hope that you see that in some of these examples of the work that we've done within this particular aim. There's been a climate survey. Again, you may be familiar with this. This was issued by the University of Nebraska system. We are having conversations about if there are, we will be able to have the data that's specific to UNL. So that's going to be helpful to us. But also if there are additional questions that were not asked in the climate survey and really information that's important to us, how do we also get at being able to get that data as well? So we're thinking through that right now. The APLU, so the Association of Public Land-Grant Universities, they have an initiative related at diversifying or increasing the diversity of STEM faculty in particular. And so we are part of a cohort that have that we've signed on that we're going to focus on this. And so myself and Judy Walker in the Executive Vice Chancellor's office, we are co-leads on this project. And so this has entailed doing a self-assessment, and we're right now meeting with a number of groups to get feedback about how we might better do this and develop an action plan around it. I suspect most of you, if you've seen anything in the media, probably know about our journey on anti-racism, racial equity. I will say just really quickly where we are in terms of the journey right now, that Chancellor Green has been asked to do more engagement across our state. And so he's going to be engaging in that work this spring. And so our hopes is that to be able to move forward and thinking about really, why it's focused on racial equity, but how do we just create equity and inclusion in general in a number of our practices. And so I hope you have the opportunity to take a look at what some of those actions are in your free time. We've also formed an inclusive campus support network. And so this is a way, and one of the areas that we've heard the most feedback is that people wanting to know that when they have negative experiences related to their cultural identity, where do they go and how does that get handled? And so we've tried to create a more systematic process to be able to do that. And so that is the Inclusive Campus Support Network. I've already mentioned before that we are working with colleges and units on their DEI strategies. Another area I would say around professional learning, Husker Dialogues, which for those of you who have been on campus, at least in the last 7 years, maybe familiar with Husker Dialogues, again, where we invite first-year students to engage in conversation with their peers around topics of diversity and inclusion. Those discussions are in small groups and they're facilitated by faculty, staff, and students currently on campus. We also know that we've been talking through how do we build inclusive excellence expectations into evaluations. And so there's now a template that offices can use, particularly for staff. We're now working on this for faculty in particular. And because of promotion and tenure, there are some other nuances that we have to consider, but this is absolutely work about how do we value inclusive excellence as part of an evaluation process for, again, for both faculty and staff. And then also weaving it into new employee orientation. We now do this for new faculty orientation, and we are working with human resources on how we incorporate it into the staff or the staff orientations as well. I mentioned before this idea about thinking about our processes and around searches and hiring and what those look like and what we can do and can't do, and how can we be intentional while still operating within the confines of the law in terms of doing this work and being effective at it. And so we have developed a recruitment guide. We are anticipated to launch this spring that will provide search committees with resources and tools and strategies that they can use in thinking about being more intentional. So again, going back to the inclusion definition, being more intentional and active in terms of the recruitment process and exactly knowing where the boundaries are. And so we are working on a recruitment guide, and then later working on updating the search committee training that, again, all of you are probably familiar with, that's required of search committees. As part of helping committees, we've developed diversity ambassadors, and this was launched spring 2022. They're currently going through training, and then they'll be available to search committees. So having individuals who have expertise to be able to support search committees in this work. We have a Faculty of Color Symposium, again, as a way to create a mechanism for both faculty of color and allies to be able to get more information about how we better support our faculty of color, again, especially given those data points that I showed you earlier. And then the Chancellor has been in the midst of forming a Native American Indigenous Advisory Board that consists of both on-campus individuals and those who are external to the university, to be a part of advising him around matters, issues, and experiences, and really how we build relationships with First Nations and tribes. And so we're excited about this work. So my last piece to share with you, and I want to make sure that we get to your questions. Opportunities for engagement was the last thing I was asked, and I had a chance to go on your website, and I again want to appreciate Pat for laying out some of the priorities that you have. And so I think some of these fit really well within the priorities of the association. And so there's some different ways to be engaged. For those of you who have expertise or subject matter expertise, we're always looking for people to present on a topic for Include. So again, Include is our learning community. And that's an opportunity, again, for you to share some aspect of diversity that people can apply in a real way. And so we try and leave individuals who are part of that learning community with practical solutions on a topic related to diversity, equity, inclusion. You can also participate in Dish It Up. I think I saw Dr. Kirkland on earlier. He's been a faithful participant in Dish It Up. But again, this is a weekly conversation, and they're just meant to be a time for people to come together. Bring your lunch. We've been doing those hybrid, which is somewhat difficult, but we've been doing them hybrid. And they're just a chance for people to share and talk about current events, and again, and those implications for diversity, equity, and inclusion. You can also volunteer for Husker Dialogues. So I mentioned before that we have facilitators who are part of that experience, and we're always looking for more facilitators. And so I've asked Charlie Foster, who oversees that program, to absolutely follow up with all of you about Husker Dialogues. Also, iChange, if you are interested or have an interest in terms of diversifying STEM faculty, we're always looking for more people who want to be a part of that, setting that action plan and helping us implement that action plan. And so we welcome that. If you are interested, you can contact me, and we'll make sure and get you in contact and get your name listed. We also invite you to share information about what's happening at UNL. We know that those who have worked here are some of our largest supporters. And so you can do that, again, signing up for our newsletter, following us on social media. And then lastly, your support is always welcome and appreciated, whether that's attending any events that are happening, whether it's our office or other diversity events that are happening on campus. We also invite people in terms of how they may be engaged in this work, of thinking about what it may mean for you. And so are there opportunities for the association to be thoughtful about diversity and inclusion and how to make that a part of your own operating structure? And then lastly, giving always helps. And so there are a number of ways that people can give to support diversity and inclusion at the institution, whether that's supporting diversity broadly, or we also have an Inclusive Student Excellence Fund that supports students directly. So with that, I will end there.